Childhood Emotional Abuse and Borderline Personality Disorder, conducted by Madison Barnhill for the Department of Psychology at Houston Baptist University. Here is an overview of the presentation. In numerous previous studies, results have shown that the environment that children are raised in is detrimental and can affect them for the rest of their lives. It has also been shown that childhood abuse has a strong connection with adulthood personality disorders. However, the specific relationship between childhood emotional abuse and borderline personality disorder is understudied. This present study aims to add to the current literature by investigating this understudied relationship and adding to the current literature that says that child abuse has a high correlation with adulthood personality disorders. The hypothesis of this present study is that if an individual is exposed to emotional abuse as a child, then they are more likely to develop borderline personality disorder compared to those who did not experience childhood emotional abuse. The independent variable in this study is the presence of borderline personality disorder as reported by the Borderline Personality Questionnaire, also called the BPQ. This independent variable has two different levels. One being the presence of borderline personality disorder, which is the experimental group of this study, and two, the absence of borderline personality disorder, being the negative control group for this study. Dependent variable of this study is the presence of childhood emotional abuse as reported by the Childhood Trauma Questionnaire short form, otherwise known as the CTQSF. Participants were between the ages of 18 and 30 and were recruited from Houston area universities, including Houston Baptist University and the University of Houston. Participants were recruited through email and signed an informed consent form before participating in the BPQ survey. Then the participants were randomly selected from two samples and placed in groups based on their scores on the BPQ. 50 males and 50 females were placed in both the control group and the experimental group, and participants were given extra credit if they selected that they were from the psychology department of either of those two universities, or they were given 1 year of free counseling services if they selected from counseling services on the entry form. This study was of an experimental design based on the presence of both a control group and an experimental group. It was also of a matched pairs design as participants were placed in either the experimental group or control group based on their scores on the BPQ. A score of 6 or higher in 7 out of the 9 subcategories on the BPQ meant that the participant would be placed in the experimental group, and if they did not meet this scoring requirement to have borderline personality disorder, they were placed in the control group. The experimental group were given numbers 1 to 100, while the control group were given numbers 101 to 200 randomly within groups. Participants were then called back into the lab to be administered the CTQSF. They were told to only use their numerical identities on the survey in order that the results be completely anonymous and only be able to tell if it came from the experimental group or the control group. After the administration of the CTQSF, only questions dealing with emotional abuse were considered, which were questions 3, 8, 14, 18, and 25. The independent variable, borderline personality disorder, was measured by the BPQ. The dependent variable, childhood emotional abuse, is measured by the Childhood Trauma Questionnaire short form. The BPQ is an 80-item self-administered questionnaire that measures the presence of various symptoms of borderline personality disorder and has been proven in previous studies to accurately measure multidimensional factors of this very intense disorder. The BPQ is measured with true or false questions, with 0 points being for a false answer and 1 point for a true, and the opposite of that on reverse scored questions. Some sample questions from the BPQ include I've deliberately tried to hurt myself without trying to kill myself, and I'm afraid to spend time alone. The CTQSF is a self-administered questionnaire with 28 questions that measures several different subgroups of childhood trauma. It also uses a Likert scale, however, only the childhood emotional abuse questions were taken into account for the study. The sample question is that people in my family called me things like stupid, lazy, and ugly. Table 1 is an illustration of the predicted results from the present study, And consistent with previous research, it was expected that borderline personality disorder would have a strong positive correlation with childhood emotional abuse and would be stronger than the control population. The results of this study concur with previous studies' results that show correlation between childhood emotional abuse and cluster B personality disorders. However, the parameters of the present study are more confined than other studies due to only one type of childhood abuse being investigated, as well as only one type of adulthood personality disorder. Potential limitations include that the study has not actually been conducted, as this is a prediction of results to be collected in the future. Another potential limitation is that comorbidities in the participants who have borderline personality disorder diagnosis were not tested for, as well as other mental illnesses that could be tested for in the control population as well. Another possible limitation to this study is that only participants between the ages of 18 and 30 were chosen for this study, and that they were only from one area in Texas. Here is the table which shows the correlation of childhood emotional abuse and adulthood borderline personality disorder according to the mean scores by each group on the CTQSF, which support the current hypothesis. And here are my references.